Hello and welcome everybody, and thank you guys for joining me once again. My name is Wilky, and as I said, I'm here with part 2, or rather the first true comparison between Kritika Online and C9 to answer some of the questions I've been getting, and also to answer, I guess, a few questions people have not been asking yet of whether or not this game is actually something for you, or for other people maybe is it worth transitioning from C9 to Kritika Online, or is that actually a game that I would enjoy? So I'm going to be answering some of these questions, maybe even answering some of the questions you haven't had in your mind. And as with the other videos, if you have anything specific I have not covered or that is unclear, feel free to let me know. Other than that, let's just dive right into... I'll basically be explaining the core of these games, and then I'll be making remarks and comparisons between various aspects of these games. I'm not going to be going too in-depth on a lot of these mechanics because they are very similar at some of these points. But basically you get a very clear idea of what these games have to offer, and also where the differences are, and also where the similarities are. Both of these games are classified as ARPGs, or so-called action RPGs, and that means they're focusing heavily on the combat system rather than any of the other mechanics involved in the game. However, there's still plenty of other things that you can explore in these games. Both of these games are instance/dungeon-based games, or dungeon crawler type games. What that means is you're going to be spending the majority of time moving in a hub, then moving to a portal or any sort of device that'll allow you to enter a dungeon of your choice, which you'll then be able to clear either alone or in a party, depending on what you set up in town. Questing is straightforward in both of these games, so it's a very handheldy game. It tells you what to do most of the time, so there's very little, I guess, things to get confused about. There's a lot of direction the game gives you, a lot of sense that the game tells you do this, do that, progress there, and stuff like that. It's at times very bland because it literally just repeats all over the same. You basically go into the dungeon because one of the NPCs tells you to, you clear the dungeon, you go out, you accept the quest, or you finish the quest, accept the new one, and yada yada yada. This is basically how both of these games play out, so if you're familiar with any of these systems, this will feel like second nature to you very easily. Both of these games have a so-called, I guess, stamina system, rather in Kritika Online it's called rest point system. There are a few differences here and there, which I will be covering later. Other than that, as I said, if you're familiar with the action RPG genre that is dungeon and instance-based, both of these games follow the same rule, so there's not really any major difference in that. So let's take a look at how the beginning in these games is. In Kritika Online, it's very straightforward. You'll be presented in the character selection screen. As of this point, you are free to choose between one of the 4 base classes. We have Warrior, Rogue, Gun Mage, and Reaper. With Reaper only having 2 subclasses at the moment, I'm not entirely sure if there's going to be more subclasses or not. However, keep in mind that there's already more classes in the Eastern clients, so we're definitely going to get future classes. The question is just when. As of this point, there are 11 classes to pick from. In Kritika Online, you start out at level 1 with a base class. You'll be presented with an introductory dungeon. Afterwards, your first goal is to hit level 15, at which point you can class change or job change into one of the subclasses. All you have to do is talk to the NPC. They do a very good job at showcasing some of the skills you're going to be getting then, and all you have to do is accept the quest. Just basically accept and confirm that you're gonna be wanting to play that class, and you're done. Afterwards, at level 50, you're gonna be presented with another quest that follows a similar pattern. All you have to do is talk to the NPC and do it, and you'll have your Awakened class, which further enhances some of your abilities, gives you access to the X-Gauge, which dramatically changes some of your skills, as well as giving you more passive skills, and basically more customization options within the game. The game does a very good job at actually cutting down the annoying part, if I want to call it that way, because there's little to no stuff involved to do that. All you have to do is level up to level 15, and you're done. In C9, it looks very similar. As of this point currently in the game, you're presented with one of the 5 base classes. And similarly to what Kritika Online tried to display with these little dots and the difficulties, you'll have a very similar overview over the 5 classes. Currently available in the game is the Fighter, the Hunter, the Shaman, the Witchblade, and the Mystic class. Keep in mind though that C9 is out for quite a while, so as time progresses, Kritika will also release new classes, as I already mentioned. Now, the progress with C9 is a little bit different and more tedious, if I'm allowed to say that. Basically, you start out simply with level 1, you also have the introduction dungeon. Afterwards, the first step is to hit level 10, do a quest to change to your elite class. So for example, if you're gonna pick a fighter, you're then gonna be a fighter, an elite fighter, and afterwards you're gonna hit level 20, and once you're level 20, you're finally able to transition from your elite class to one of the true job changes you want to do. Afterwards, at level 50, you'll have another quest line which you have to do in order to unlock your Fury skill, which is like a very powerful skill that will further, I guess, enhance your PvE abilities and also change the name of your class. The progress in this game, or both of these games, is very similar. You're basically tasked to talk to an NPC, they will give you a quest, which is either kill certain mobs, clear a certain dungeon, collect a few items for this and that. And after you've done so, all you basically have to do is go back to the NPC, accept your rewards, which is usually going to be silver or gold and XP, and occasionally also items or maybe access to new or other areas. And then all you have to do is rinse and repeat that system. There is very little to absolutely no difference at all in both of these games. All they do is, in that regard, is they have you talk to NPCs, which basically dictates which dungeons you should do. By no means you have to do them. You don't have to quest if you don't like it. There's no reason to do quests, or at least all of these quests. Some of these quests, at least in C9 for example, some of these quests do reward you with stat increasing items or skill points, so it plays a rather vital role, at least to some extent, in C9, whereas in Kritika so far, other than receiving 3 accessories or 4, none of these quests, at least from what I can tell right now, seem to be mandatory or having any really desirable item, but maybe that'll change in the later course of the game. But as far as progression goes, both of these, as I said, are very straightforward. Just talk to the NPC, they'll go have you clear this dungeon, kill that mob, and you're basically done. So there's little to no difference in that. If you're familiar with any of these systems, this is very easy to follow. This makes progress very easy and very streamlined. There's very little to stray off the path, so you don't really have time to get confused or get caught up in something because, oh, I don't know which dungeon to do, I don't know what to clear. Both of these dungeons basically tell you what to do until you reach a state in the game, at which point you probably know what you're doing already. So both of these games do a very good job at leading you and telling you what to do and when to do it. This is a little random fact, like, do you remember that sound effect? Maybe, maybe not. Does that seem familiar? Let me show you this. Does that one sound familiar to you? That's just a random thing that I stumbled upon, like when I was upgrading my equipment. I was like, well, that's a sound they used in C9, isn't it? It's just a random fact, and by no means that means anything. It's a very popular sound that is used for enchantment. It's just a funny fact that I have encountered. Let's talk about dungeons and the stamina system. For Kritika Online, as I said, it works exactly the same like any other game of that type. You're basically being presented in a town, which right now, the hub I'm in, or town, is called Deep Rock Mine. And I have the portal, which is in this game called Danger Zone Highway, and all you basically do is you enter through that portal. You'll be presented with all of the dungeons you currently can enter, And then you basically are free to pick any of these difficulties. What's cool about that, it also shows you, for example, that this dungeon has 2 quests for me, whereas these do not have any. So it basically also shows you what dungeons you have a quest for, which makes it very, very easy to follow the quest line, and you basically cannot really miss anything. So it's very, very streamlined, and it's very easy to follow. The good thing about Kritika Online is, I mentioned that in the other videos, but that's a really cool feature. It basically gives you sorta a bit of a hint of how difficult the dungeon's gonna be, or how good your gear is compared to the dungeon you're clearing. So depending on the difficulty, you see this combat rating, and that's basically made out of your weapon and how much damage you can deal. As far as the dungeons itself go, Kritika Online does not waste any time doing anything at all, like any fancy. As you can see at the top right, that's how the map's gonna be looking like. This is how the map looks. You straight off the bat know what the dungeon's gonna be looking like. You know all of the areas. For example, one of the quests is to kill the boss, so it'll pop up with a question mark on the room where quest target or quest item is in. So it's very, very straightforward, and you can't really miss anything. The downside is, at least so far, none of these dungeons have changed the layout. They all look the same regardless of the difficulty, and there's really not much to explore. Like, these rooms, they're just basically stacked on top of each other, and you just progress through room by room until you reach the end, and then you're there. Which is, well, as far as the exploration and seeing new things goes, not a heavy point, and not a thing where Kritika really does a good job. Looking at C9, it, as I said, follows a very similar mechanic. You basically go to a portal or any sort of device that will allow you to choose the hub. As you can see, it's a bit more stylized. It's actually like a map. You're taking a look at something like that. Unlike in Kritika, where it's just straightforward. You just you have these dungeons lined up, you have the difficulty settings, and that's it. C9 is a bit more, I guess, enthusiastic, or was enthusiastic about these things. You basically pick any of these dungeons. However, as I said, there's no score or anything, so you don't exactly know how difficult the dungeon is unless you set foot into it. But then again, that's just a minor thing really to overlook. Other than that, it follows a similar pattern. You basically have difficulty settings, some of which you have to unlock, which is, I guess, a bit different from Kritika Online. Maybe later dungeons in Kritika will follow the same rule. I do not know yet. So let's just take a look at, I guess, one of these dungeons. You have a few other options that you can set, which are not available in Kritika. So that's just how it is. Now we have a whisper. Interesting. Alright. So, as you can see, as I said, in Kritika Online, you were presented with a map overall, so you knew what the dungeon's going to look like. Unlike in C9, you don't really have that. You're thrown into a room. You do have the map, yes, but that's about it. So without actually, not having ever played this dungeon, you do not know what it looks like, and it feels a bit more vibrant, like an actual world you're traveling in. So that point definitely goes to C9 in terms of how you explore dungeons and how the exploration feels like, because there's always something, well, not really new, it just feels more alive and more like a real world you're exploring. As far as towns are concerned, Kritika Online is a very, very, very simple game in that regard. It follows the rule of keeping it simple. It's very easy to learn, and there's not much to, I guess, fuss about. You see everything on the minimap. It's a very limited amount of space. It's not confined. It doesn't feel like it's really cramped, but for sure there's not too much to walk around and go by. You basically have the NPCs all lined up on the minimap, and that's it. You can fast travel, I guess, between the other hubs, and obviously some of these hubs are a bit bigger, they look a bit more like a town, whereas this is like more of a base camp. But generally, all the NPCs you need are around. It's very easy to find yourself around, and there's not too much to get lost in. So as that regard, it's quite clear that there was not too much focus on making these top hubs or towns very lively, because they're just basically used to stand around when you're not PvPing or not PvEing. As far as the worlds and towns go in C9, as I said, it follows a similar rule or pattern as we already experienced in the dungeons. It feels a lot more alive if you open the map. there's actually space, you have to move around, it's not everything, it's not like you can reach everything within basically a stone throw. You have to travel around a bit, and these towns do feel a lot more alive. There's huge things like that, and I'm not talking about buildings because, as I said, some towns in Kritika also have buildings, but generally they're more vast, they're more open space, so everything seems to be more open and more aligned. Like, you're just in this town right now, and you're venturing out in the danger zone, I guess, if you want to call it that way. You also have a sort of world map, just like in Kritika, but unlike Kritika where you just open the map and click on fast travel, you do have to visit one of these portals that will basically allow you to teleport into one of the 4 currently available towns. So as I said, this is a lot, I guess, more spacier, but it's just a very minor thing that just makes people feel a lot more welcome and home in a game, rather than just having these hubs where you just stand around. But then again, it's just a personal choice. It's just one of the few things that are actually quite different between those two games. As far as the combat goes, that's a bit of a topic that I guess I will most likely have to elaborate in one of my future videos as well regarding that thing, but generally saying is C9 does have the more in-depth combat system about these two games, period. There's no other explanation to that. C9 definitely has a more in-depth combat system than Kritika does. However, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Like, of course, the good thing about that is that in C9 you have a lot more mechanics to learn, you have a lot more frame mechanics in the game, you have, I guess, a bit more of a mature approach. These skill effects do not fly all over the screen. For example, Kritika Online is very, very flashy, and I'll show you some C9 footage in a second so you know what I'm talking about. Even though I'm only playing alone and this class is like level 25, if I start using some of the skills, it gets really all cluttery on my screen, and you basically have a hard time actually really seeing what's going on. C9 was a lot more sleek and cleaner in that regard, and as I said, it has a lot more mechanics to bear with. It includes verticality on almost any class. Almost any class can do some sort of air combos, some focus more on that than others. Of course, for PvE, that's not that much of a main focus, but generally it still is there. Whereas in Kritika, well, you do have air attacks, as you can see, but with the exception, I think, of the Acrobat or the Cat Girl, I'm not sure which of these two, it seems that verticality does not seem to be playing a major role in any of these, any of the other classes in Kritika Online. So basically, the combat is going to be focused on the ground and things like that. It definitely is faster, though. It's faster than C9's combat is, and it's more flashy. It's heavily based on the hotkeys. Like, you can see all of these skills, they're basically all going to be put onto one of your hotkeys or hotbars, and that's it. Whereas in C9 you do have things called command skills or inputs, which basically allow you to use certain skills without putting them on a hotkey, like for example pressing backwards and F, forwards and F, and things like that, which are basically non-existent in Kritika Online at this point. As mentioned, C9 has a very in-depth frame mechanic. They have semi-super armor, ranged immunity, grab immunity, and all sorts of things, which some of them are you currently seeing on the screen, which is like the red line or the blue line around characters. Whereas in Kritika, you basically only have the distinction between the Ultra State, which basically makes you immune from normal attacks, and Ultra Breaker, that will basically break that stance. As far as I'm concerned, there's no grabs, there's no semi-super armor, no ranged immunity, something like that. But keep in mind that I do not have that much combat experience in Kritika yet. Whether or not you like action RPGs or basically games that heavily focus on combat, personally, if you were to ask me after all this, I've basically said, if you would enjoy Kritika, especially after you played C9, definitely yes. C9 reigns superior in terms of combat in-depth, mechanics, and all that stuff. Kritika is definitely less difficult to learn and to master in that regard. Nonetheless, it's insanely fast, it's super fun, it's flashy. So if the art style is not putting you off, If the flashiness and a bit of lack of depth of mechanic is not going to deter you from actually enjoying a game like that, then I definitely say check out the game and see if it is something that you would genuinely enjoy. Other than that, thank you guys for sticking around. As I said, there might be multiple videos of this, especially since the PvP mechanics are not as easily explained, so I might be making more of these comparisons in the future. If there's anything else you want to know, anything I left unsaid, anything that was unclear, feel free to let me know and I will definitely catch up to you and let you know either in a future video or in the comment section below. Other than that, I had fun making this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully some of you learned or basically have a better idea and understanding now what Kritika is all about, and if it's something that you want to spend your time in. Anyways, thank you guys for sticking around, and as always, hopefully see you guys